What's your scariest, most disturbing true story? Story 1. I was on a backpacking trip on the Appalachian Trail, and my dad and I stopped at one of the many public cabins. We set our bags down and joined the campfire. It was just us and a middle-aged Asian couple. We began talking and the sun set, so we did not expect anyone else to come. Nevertheless, this huge guy with long silver hair set his small pack down under the awning and joined us at the fire. He was no less than 6 feet 8 inches tall, extremely muscular, and had his hair tied back into a ponytail. Imagine a more muscular Geralt from The Witcher. We started talking, and he seemed very friendly. Then my dad asked the man, "So where are you from?" No response. My dad repeated the question, thinking the guy did not hear him. No response. The Asian guy asked the question, and suddenly the big guy exploded yelling, "I do not know! I do not know!" He then took out a huge Bowie knife and a whetstone and started sharpening it. All of us decided to pack our stuff and leave for the next cabin, which was about 7 miles away. It was a walk, but we eventually made it there, and there was a dirty hippie guy already there. He smelled horrible but was harmless. We stopped at the campfire to hang out for a bit. Then I saw a reflection out of the corner of my eye. I turned around and saw the big silver-haired guy standing in the tree line, watching us. At that moment, I nearly lost it, because there was no way all of us could take this guy on. He was built like a professional wrestler, and we were all under 6 feet tall. I let the other people know, and the Asian guy took out a revolver and told the man to back off. The big guy stood there for a moment and then silently walked off into the woods without making a sound. After that incident, we agreed to have someone keep watch. Since the Asian guy had a gun, he volunteered while we slept. In the morning, I was so glad the big guy did not come back because the Asian man had fallen asleep. That moment still gives me chills. Story 2. When I was a kid, my friend and I were walking into a nearby park just after lunch. As we entered, an older guy who was probably in his mid to late teens approached us. He asked if we wanted to see the guns he had in his trunk, and we of course said no and tried walking away, but he grabbed my friend and tried dragging him toward his car. We screamed for help, and he let go and ran off toward his car. A little while later, a couple of police officers stopped us and asked if we had seen a teenager matching his description, so we told them what happened. Luckily, I had a great memory as a kid and remembered his license plate, so after telling the police everything, they escorted us back to my place. A week later, we found out this guy had abducted and assaulted 6 kids and ended up being tried as an adult instead of a teenager, and is probably still in prison. I still remember the incident clearly. Story 3, I was 12 years old, and we were 3 kids sharing 2 bedrooms. So my dad decided to put up a half wall to make a third. If I stood on my bed, I could see into my brother's room. We were young and used to throw a ball over before falling asleep. One night I was just drifting off when my mom tapped me on the shoulder and said, "Psst, what are you doing?" I thought that was a very weird question. Obviously, I was sleeping. So I turned around to answer her, only it was not my mom. It was not a person. It looked like a 3-dimensional shadow of a man, just black. I screamed while my eyes were closed, and the figure disappeared. My mom and dad came running into my room. I told them everything. They thought it was just my imagination, but told me if I was scared to go sleep in the room with my brother. I tried to sleep, but I was shaken. My brother woke up once to go use the bathroom upstairs, and I pretended I was asleep. I did not want him to know I was still afraid. I heard him go into my room right next door, climb on the bed, and then just stop. I thought he was trying to purposefully scare me, so I looked up to show him I was awake and saw the figure again, arms crossed with its head resting on its hands. Even though it had no facial features whatsoever, I knew it was looking at me. I tried to convince myself it was just dark. It was my brother playing a prank and I was seeing things. Then I heard the toilet flush upstairs. It was just that one night. I never saw anything like it again, or even close. But years later in my 20s, I was living alone and felt the tap on my shoulder. "Psst, what are you doing?" I will stop there because you will think I am crazy. But that was the last time I heard it. And I am 31 now. It is not a ghost story. I will remember that day until I die. Story 4. A guy followed me home from the train station once. I think he still knows where I live. I got out of work and was waiting at the train station. I had my headphones in and was staring at the screen with the arrival and departure times. This guy suddenly appeared out of nowhere, got really close to my face, and asked me if I had a boyfriend. I said nothing and walked away quickly. He looked and smelled homeless and had these big wild eyes that were darting around the room as he spoke. He also had an obvious arousal and had gotten so close that he spit on my cheek. There are strange people at train stations. Whatever. I thought I would never see him again anyway. After I got off the train, I took 2 buses and walked a few blocks to get home. I was focused on the podcast I was listening to and was not paying attention to my surroundings. All of the buses were also very crowded. When I reached my stop and started to walk home, I noticed that the creepy guy got off the bus behind me. There was nobody else around, so I ran home. When I got to my door and started to unlock it, he was standing at the end of my driveway. I was crying and fumbling with my keys. Then some of my neighbors pulled up in a truck and I screamed, "Hello, sir, help!" Then the creepy guy turned and walked away into the woods. I called the police, but they did not show up for a while. They had me write a statement but seemed uninterested. My husband left work early and came home. We saw the creepy guy lingering around the neighborhood and walking past our house a few times in the following days, but he eventually stopped. I have not seen him since. Story 5. Recently, a friend and I were swapping our favorite horror movies. We were childhood friends who grew up in the same Detroit suburb. I was thinking about an incident that had happened when I was in second or third grade about 30 years ago, and she said out of the blue, "I do not know if you remember this, but the police started patrolling our neighborhood when we were in second or third grade because when I was walking home from school, 2 men in a blue pickup truck rolled down the window next to me and said, 'Hey girl, you need a ride home.' And one tried to grab me. I took off running, tearing through yards, and I told my mom, who called the cops and walked with me to the bus stop after that. I confessed that I was thinking about a time when my cousin Sean, who recently passed away, so he has been on my mind, and he was really smart, much smarter than I was, and I were wandering around the neighborhood like kids did in the 80s. This blue pickup truck pulled up to us, and one of the 2 guys asked us to hop in for a ride. Sean said, "No thanks," and instructed me to sneak into a neighbor's back porch, luckily unlocked, and stay down. I whispered that I was afraid we would get in trouble for not asking the neighbor for permission because I was not the brightest kid and would rather risk danger than break the rules. And Sean said, "Stay here and hide. Act like we went inside because we live here." One of the 2 guys got out of the truck and went into the yard to look for us. We laid low. About 15 minutes later, he left. I look back on it now and think what a close call. We lived near the area of the Oakland County child killer, though in a much poorer neighborhood than he targeted, and I have spent the last few nights reading about the case and thinking about that blue truck. Story 6. In high school, my friend and I made the reckless decision to smoke weed in a graveyard around 8 or 9 at night, summertime, so it was just getting dark. I smoked to the point of being totally out of it. We were just sitting next to a tree when I saw a man walking down the graveyard path. I got a little nervous immediately but tried to brush it off. Then I saw the man pull out a handgun and aim towards something. He did not notice us at this point, and I could not see who or what he was aiming at. I was so terrified I thought I was mildly hallucinating. I could not even move. My friend hit my side and said, "Dude, this guy has a gun out. We have to get out of here." We both slowly got up, but like the stoned idiots we were, we hit a rock trying to get up, and the man finally noticed us. He was a good 200 feet away from us, but the second he saw us, he slowly moved toward us with the gun in his hand. We started running at that point, and I looked behind my shoulder once and saw him start to run toward us as well. We booked it out of the graveyard and were finally back in my neighborhood. I was terrified for days after that. Story 7. It is really not that bad, and maybe there are some other explanations, and maybe it is not actually my most disturbing true story, but I have been thinking about it the last few days. So near where I live is this little place called Concrete City. It is just this circle of empty concrete buildings that used to be homes to coal miners or something like that. But it is totally abandoned now, and some of the structures are crumbling. It is like a giant concrete playground for young adults to smoke, tag the walls, and play paintball. So me and a couple of others were wandering around the place, and we started coming up on this parked car. I saw two people in the front shuffling around, and I was just thinking, oh great, we are about to walk up on two people being intimate. Nobody else in the group seemed to pay it any mind, so I kept walking. Then I noticed it was not a couple. Two big guys were in the front, staring us down, sitting completely still, and looking extremely shady. Still, we all just kept going, and at this point I was just glad we were in a group of 5, and still kind of worried we were about to get hurt, as in chopped to bits and spread around in piles. And then I saw why I got this exact feeling. We were right up alongside the car now, and I could not help but glance in the back window. An open cooler filled with bloody ice, a second closed cooler probably filled with the same, and a pile of clear plastic bags. I kept my mouth shut and kept walking. When we were just past the car, the engine revved up, and those two guys tore out of there like something was after them. So it could have been a couple of poachers, or maybe organ theft, and somewhere in Concrete City lay a man with a missing kidney. I do not know, but it was extremely shady. Story 8. This was roughly about 3 years ago. Now, to preface this story, I am not a believer in the supernatural, occult, magic, or anything like that. My best friend, however, is. This is not fake. I did not make this up. Where I grew up, there is a road called Indian Cabin Road. It is a long road that intersects several other roads, eventually going from pavement to dirt after a bit. You eventually end up near a river in another town, but for a while you drive through the woods with no guidance except for the dirt road since no phones get signal out there. Now, being from a small town, every kid knows about it. It is almost a rite of passage. I 100% know that if I were to walk up to any local at a roadside store and ask about Indian Cabin Road, they would immediately say, yeah, that place is haunted, and leave it at that. So anyway, my best friend and I decided to find it and drive down it the night of Halloween. After searching our maps and finding the street it forked off of, we drove down in her old car thinking all the while, why did we choose the worst car in the world to go off-road? She is a firm believer in the supernatural. So the whole time she was playing up the fact that it was Halloween and we were driving down the most haunted road in our town. I was rolling my eyes trying not to laugh because it was Halloween and I might as well enjoy the supposed spookiness of it all. We ended up driving most of it without realizing it until we reached the part where the road was essentially a dirt pathway. Not even 10 minutes later, my friend inexplicably stopped her car and said that she did not want to drive down anymore because her car could not handle it. Before I could even reply, I heard her say in the most bone-chilling, terrified voice I had ever heard in my life, "What is that?" In the tree line, there was what only I can describe as this spinal skeleton thing, staring at us with glowing red eyes. It was on all fours, but its body was stretched out so that its back legs were bigger than its front. It was pitch black outside at this point, but both her high beams and headlights were on, so I am 100% certain it was not a human in a suit or an animal or anything in between. It stared, this inky black creature, and started to move toward us. Now in high-stress situations, I usually end up laughing to calm my fears, and at this point I started chuckling, telling her it was just a wolf and that there was nothing to be afraid of. My friend immediately took off, repeatedly asking me what it was and what was happening. All I kept saying, all I could say really, was it is just a wolf. It is just a wolf. I was legitimately scared, and to this day I have no idea what we saw. We have not driven down there since, and my friend repeatedly brings it up whenever I mention I do not believe in the supernatural. Story 9. As I was writing my other post, I was reminded of the time my friend and I traveled to Europe together when we were about 16 or 17. We both loved animals and would buy sausages to feed the local stray dogs. The dogs would follow us around for a time and greet us daily. They were two pretty big mixed-breed dogs that we had befriended. One day, these guys rolled up in a shady, falling-apart red sports car. They said they wanted us to come party with them and followed us when we refused. We had started to get scared and went to the other side of the street to avoid them, only they turned around and continued to follow us, pleading for us to come with them. At the seemingly perfect moment, the dogs we had been feeding ran up to the car and started barking and trying to bite the passenger. He rolled up his window and drove away. I have no idea how those dogs sensed we were in danger and came to our rescue, But we gave them extra sausages that day. I do not know what would have happened if they did not chase the guys off. Story. Back in 2008, I was 15, and I lived on a 300-acre ranch in a small town in Idaho. I lived in a 5-bedroom, 3-bathroom 1980s cheaply built home with my parents and sister. My 6 older brothers had already grown up and moved out. My sister and I slept in the bedrooms upstairs, just down the hall from my parents' room. Her room was directly across from mine. That year, I started having nightmares about dark figures, and then I would wake up around the same time every night, 3 in the morning. One night I woke up, looked out into the hallway, and a dark figure walked past my door. I blinked a few times, decided I was dreaming, and went back to sleep. The next day I moved my bed so when I woke up I would not look out the door into the hallway, thus making it harder to imagine things walking by in the night. 3 in the morning came around again, and I woke up to a woman's voice singing this high-pitched, eerie song right next to my ear. There was this dark, heavy feeling in the air, and I stopped breathing. The singing continued, and then ever so softly I felt someone or something playing with my hair, softly running its hands down my red hair. I closed my eyes and said a silent prayer because I was too terrified to speak a word out loud. As soon as I finished praying, the song stopped and I heard a scream fade away. The next day I told my mom about the experience and she dismissed it as a dream. I forced myself to believe her. It had to be a dream because if it was real, I would not ever be able to sleep again. Dream or not, I moved my bed back to where it had been the night before. 3 in the morning came around again, and suddenly I found myself awake staring at the dark hallway between mine and my sister's rooms. That was when a dark, slender figure walked in between our rooms and stood in the hallway. It turned its head and looked into my sister's room, and then into my room. Back into my sister's room and then turned to look back into my room again. My heart was pounding through my chest and all I wanted to do was scream, but I could not. I was so scared that I froze. The figure paused and almost smiled. It was not a smile, because I could not make out its face, but it was like it knew it had me. Then just as I was gathering the courage to scream, the figure got down on its hands and knees and started crawling into my room. I screamed the most pathetic scream of my life and yelled that there was something in my room. My parents turned on the lights and came running into my room to find nothing. To this day, my parents say I was dreaming. I switched rooms after that, and even now refuse to sleep in that room when I visit my folks. I do not know what I saw or what happened. All I know is that it did happen. Story 11. My neighbor's an old lady. She comes outside every once in a while to chat with passersby and garden. The first conversation she had with my dad, she complimented the painting he has hanging in his bedroom. No big deal. She probably saw us moving it in or glimpsed it at some point before we got curtains. But then she met our dog and said, "Well, he is much scarier through the window, is he not?" Again, no big deal. We know he has a habit of pushing aside blinds to stare outside. She comments on things like this often, asking us why we did not walk our dog that morning or when we got a new sofa. But she is just an old lady, right? She is probably bored and outside a lot. Then she met me. She swore she had already met me, but I had never seen her before in my life. She asked me how I liked my room and told me about the girls who had it before me. Weird, but okay, she rubbed me the wrong way. But I did not really mind. She was fairly easy to avoid. Or so I thought. As I was taking the dog outside, I happened to glance over and saw her staring at me through the window. She lowered the blinds when she saw that I saw her, but she was peeking through them watching me. Later I went to the kitchen and saw her again watching me very intently through the window. Our blinds were slightly open to let light in. Then upstairs in my parents' room, there was a window in their bathroom. I saw her again as I was replacing the towels. Watching. The more I looked for her, the more I saw she was watching basically all the time. Not only from her window, she sits in her car and watches us from the street. She sits on her porch and watches. She slowly walks down the street and watches us literally all hours of the day. And she does it to her other neighbors, and she did it to the people who had our house before us. Everyone knew to keep their blinds and curtains shut at all times. Otherwise, you could guarantee she would watch you. It freaked me out. Story 12. My friend had invited me to go on a trip to Universal, Florida with her family. On the way back home, we picked up their new puppy, so we made frequent stops to let it use the restroom. It was around 8 in the evening when we stopped at a gas station in a smaller town. My friend and I decided to go in and use the restroom. When we got to the door, there were two bigger men at the counter talking to the cashier. I reached to open the door, but the man closest to it reached over and held it shut for about 30 seconds while they continued to talk to the cashier, which should have been my first clue to hold it and get back to the car. But eventually he moved and let us in. The bathroom was one of those single stalls, so I went and used it first, then waited on my friend by the door once I was finished. I noticed the guys kept glancing in my direction, and I was starting to feel very uneasy. My friend and I exited the building and were talking about how odd the men were, when not even 30 seconds after we left, the two men started following us. Luckily, my friend's car was not too far down the sidewalk, and we ran the rest of the way, jumping into the car as fast as we could. The two men slowed down and kept walking as soon as they saw my friend's mother in the car, and luckily that was the end of it. But I have never been so creeped out in my life. I am positive that if we had been alone, we would have been abducted that night. Story. 13, I ran on the track team in high school, and during my first 2 years, I rode the late after-school bus to get home. On Tuesday through Thursday, there were 2 buses that took students home, but on Mondays and Fridays, everyone had to ride one bus, and the bus was driven by this really creepy guy. He would look at girls through the rearview mirror and stare at them for long periods of time while giving this really unsettling smile, which made all of the girls uncomfortable. One day, this guy was the bus driver who took our team to a track meet at another school. The buses would normally stay parked in the parking lot for the duration of the meet. Well, I had a while until my next race, so I decided to go and watch my teammates run, and I went to watch by the gate, which was near the track's entrance. It started to drizzle, so I went to stand under this pavilion to stay dry, and after a few minutes, I saw the bus driver there, and he came over to me and asked me if I wanted to get on the bus to keep out of the rain. At this point, I was really nervous, but I said yes anyway, because I was afraid of what would happen if I said no. So the two of us started heading to the bus, and I was freaking out when a few of my male teammates saw that I was about to get on the bus, and they decided that they wanted to get out of the rain too. They came over to the bus as I was about to get on and asked if they could get on, but the bus driver shook his head and said, "Not you guys, just her." Now I was really scared and I stuttered out that I was sorry, but I did not want to go on the bus anymore, and I ran to the bleachers where I stayed for the rest of the meet. Even though nothing happened, I still get a sick feeling thinking about what could have happened if those guys had not come and I had gone on the bus. Story 14, I was in Italy near the Alps when I was around 7, and I would walk down the hill to play with this kid that lived there, even though neither of us could understand each other. The kid had a dog that we would play with too. One day when I walked down there, the whole yard was covered in bugs. They might have been locusts or something similar, but they were everywhere. I was about to turn and run, but I saw a mass in the middle of the yard. I then realized it was the dog, just lying there covered in bugs. I thought it might be dead, but I ran to it and pulled on his collar. He just looked up at me, then put his head back down. I kept pulling and I was yelling for the neighbor kid. No one responded. I then convinced the dog to get up, and at this point, bugs were also covering me, and I was terrified. I pulled the dog into this shed, and I hid in there with him and cried. I think I was in there for like 10 minutes, and there was a knock. It was the neighbor looking at me through the window. He opened the door and started yelling at me, but I could not understand him. I looked behind him, and the yard that was previously covered in a plague of bugs was now empty. I tried explaining what happened, but it was all lost in translation. I did not go back over there again. Story 15. One of my best friends lived through hell without telling anyone. She was assaulted, beaten, and choked by her boyfriend, who everyone thought was a charming person. She did not break up with him because she was afraid of being murdered. One day she staged a scenario where she was traveling without him and broke it off. So during the first days of his rage, she was far away and with her family. When I found out, I got very angry. There was no way some guy would do that to my friend and walk away without consequences. So everywhere she was, I was with her. He started to stalk her, and go to her grandmother's house to cry and tell her my friend was a terrible person for leaving him. He would always go after he left his job, so I went there. When he got there, I was there too, with a police officer. He never went there again. The police officer was my dad's friend, and he needed to return something to my dad. He lived in another city, could not reach my dad, and was off duty. He called me and asked if I could pick it up with him, so I lied and told him I would be at that address at that time. He went there, and we were just chatting about his kids when the ex showed up. Every time a girl would like his photos on social media, I would add them and tell them the truth about him, afraid they would block him without saying a word. He probably figured this out because he made his friend come talk to me to pretend to be interested and probably try to control me. I had no boyfriend at the time, but I was not stupid. The friend thing did not work, so he started stalking me. Every bar, party, or meeting I went to, he was there. I was his new obsession. He even went to my work and waved to me when I left at night. I waved back and smiled. At this point, I was afraid for my life, but also relieved that he was not chasing my friend too much anymore. I started to get strange calls every day, so I called the police officer, my dad's friend. I told him the whole story. He told me that without my friend reporting it, he could not do much, but that I should text him my location every time I went to someplace that was not my house, work, or school. I started doing that. Later, I found out he was in the same motorcycle club that my uncle was in, and that he was gathering all the information he could about me through my uncle, posing as my friend. My uncle was naive in the beginning, but I am his favorite niece, and he started to distrust this guy. How could he be my friend and not know everything he was asking? So my uncle called me and told me everything. I told him everything. Told him to make sure no girls would be alone with him or allow him to flirt with them. He agreed and told me he would keep an eye on him. Until one day my friend told me he was gone. He was not stalking her anymore, and she felt she was free after 4 years. I knew that only meant I was his new target. So he started to take walks on my street. A neighbor called the police once and told them that a strange man was around. The police came when he had already left. This went on for a long time until he found me in the perfect situation to confront me. He found out my parents were traveling and I would be alone at home. Remember my dad's friend, the police officer? He knew that too. He has 2 girls and always treated me as one of his own. So I texted him every time I heard or saw something weird. So the ex saw me leaving my home to go get some gas when midway to the gas station my car stopped working. He did something to my car. I figured I had better chances running than staying there alone in the street. So I ran. I got to the gas station where police officers often stay after duty because that gas station has some deal that they only get gas and wash their cars there. It is always full of police. I was so terrified that after seeing from far away a guy in a police uniform, I just ran and hugged him. The ex was just behind me and pretended to walk away when he saw the police there. I started to cry, and other police officers came by to see what was happening. I told them I was being followed by that guy, and I was almost sure he had done something to my car. 2 of them went after him. He pretended like he was innocent and doing nothing wrong, but he was found with a lot of illegal substances, so he was arrested for that. The ex did not know the extent of my relationship with those police officers and probably thought I was familiar with all of them. I know for a fact that my dad's friend beat him during his one day in jail, and after that he never stalked me or my friend again. For no reason, he went to my uncle and said sorry. Just that, said sorry and left. I met him once more after that. He was coming down a street downtown, but once he saw me, he turned and went the other way. I never saw him again. It still creeps me out a lot when I hear someone that has his name or know him. I never got my revenge for what he did to my friend, but that beating in jail at least gave me some peace. Story 16. I had dated this guy for almost 2 years. In these 2 years, I was horribly abused, controlled, gaslighted, insulted, robbed of about $3,000, isolated, assaulted, and had my safety threatened. He left me on our 2-year anniversary, which was the best thing that ever happened to me. All was well, and I got over it quickly. I was free again. I admittedly was a bit of a partier after that and slept around. It was the first time I had been able to do anything fun since being dumped by that guy. All was well, and I settled down and got together with my now fiancé. That was when things got bad. My ex started harassing me, texting me, getting in contact with my friends, basically anything he could do to stalk me when we were 300 miles apart. His attempts at contacting me died down, and I had gone to visit my mom who lives out of state this past summer. She knew most of what happened with my ex, minus the assault. One morning I was getting ready for work when a private number called. I knew exactly who it was. This blocked number proceeded to call 93 times in 20 minutes. Each time I declined the call. It rattled me a bit, but I decided to forget about it and go to work. As we were getting in the car, I got a text from a number in the area code of my school. Then another, and another. 3 different numbers all around the same time. All of them were different, but essentially asking the same thing, if I wanted to hook up. I figured they were the guys I had one-night stands with, since I had deleted their numbers. But I was weirded out by the fact they all texted me at the same time. I decided to reply to one with no, and was terrified by the response of good luck with your group assault. At this point I started crying and had just pulled into the parking lot of my job. My mom asked me what was wrong, and I showed her the text. My phone by then was getting flooded with texts from the area code about a group assault, how people could get a fraternity to do it, how I was a stupid person for posting a fake ad, and more. She was furious. We sat in the car for a bit as I texted my boyfriend asking what to do. My mom then decided it would be best to give notice and get home as soon as I could to get in contact with the police. During this, my boyfriend contacted my ex and told him to stop whatever he was doing. He was suspicious of how these people got my number all at once and checked social media to see if my ex had posted my number somewhere. So he decided to look on a classified site in my school's area. Sure enough, there was a post about me. It was an ad made under my name, claiming I wanted to be assaulted by a group of guys, saying no protection and no questions asked. It listed my phone number, a dated picture of me with an update on how I look now, and my apartment complex. He sent me the screenshot of the ad, and I showed it to my mom. She called his family and then the local police down where he was to report what was happening while I talked to my boss. She understood the weight of the situation and let me leave that day. My boyfriend had police and detectives in his family, so he contacted them, and my ex is now under surveillance by local police. I left to return home 2 days later. While everything eventually settled down, I was forced to withdraw from that university and move in with my fiancé, which by no means is a bad thing, but I can never return to my old apartment or that town again in fear of being recognized. And because the texts are considered evidence, I cannot delete them off my phone. I am used to them being there by now, but it is a constant reminder of what happened. Story 17. I was 13 years old in Brooklyn, New York, just a week or two after my 13th birthday. A friend and I went to the movies about once a week. Normally, we went to one of several movie theaters in his neighborhood, but there were times when the movie he wanted to see, he always picked the movie, and I did not care what he chose because I loved going to the movies regardless, was not playing in his neighborhood. So we would sometimes go to a theater outside his neighborhood. This particular time, we had to go way out to Manhattan to see the movie, and I have long since forgotten the title. We took a train out to Manhattan, saw the movie, and took the train home. Because we lived in different neighborhoods, we had to get off at different stops. He got off at his stop, and I had to continue to the last stop so that I could catch a connecting train to take me home. The subway car I was sitting in was completely empty, and so was the car next to it, which was the first car of the train. After sitting there in the empty car, I do not know what possessed me, but I decided to move to another car instead of sitting there in the empty car. I got up and moved into the next car where there were people. I decided to move even further to another car again, but some leather-jacketed guy got in my path and told me that the other train cars were closed. I knew this guy was lying, but I did not want any trouble from him, so I just said, "Oh," and turned around and went back into the empty car I came from and took my old seat. That guy and his friends took my response as a sign of weakness and cowardice, which it was. I was a meek little 13-year-old kid with no confidence whatsoever. I was sitting there in my seat when a metal dart landed on the floor at my feet, followed by an angry, gruff voice yelling to pick it up. I looked over to my right, and that leather-jacketed guy and his friends around a half dozen or so, poured into the car and came straight at me. His dart-throwing friend was one of the first to reach me as he ordered me to pick up the dart again. I did so, and then he ordered me to hand it to him. I did. Then he proceeded to throw the dart directly into my legs over and over again. I screamed and cried. I put my hands over my legs in an effort to shield them, but then he ordered me to move my hands away or else. I did, and he proceeded to throw his dart into my legs again as he stood over me. My memory is a bit hazy as to how the rest progressed, but I do recall that after the dart throwing, they proceeded to use me as a punching bag, fists flying into my face, chest, and stomach, not one of them at a time, but several of them at the same time. I managed to break free of these guys and made a run for the car door so that I could escape into the next car, where there were people. But one of them was guarding the door. This guy was not taking part in my torture with his friends. He just stood at the door as lookout. I could sense that this guy had some compassion for me, that he felt some sort of guilt about what was going on, which was why he was not taking part that I could recall. But as I reached the door, he still prevented my escape. I yelled, I screamed, I cried. I begged him to let me go, but he would not. He threw me back to his friends. That guy keeping me trapped in that car with his friends in that very second was the worst feeling ever. Somewhere along the line, I found myself on my knees on the floor of the subway car. I reached into my pocket and pulled out all the money I had on me at the time. All the money I had in the world. A single dime. I held it out to them in the palm of my hand above my head and yelled that it was all I had. Please take it and leave me alone. I felt a leather-gloved hand press into my palm and take the dime, but they still were not finished with me. One of them got the bright idea that he wanted to see my head go crashing through one of the windows of the subway car. So they grabbed me and actually started to ram me headfirst into the glass of one of the windows. Fortunately, subway car windows are strong and shatterproof. They had to be due to all the vibrations from a moving train. I cannot recall how many times they rammed my head into the glass, somewhere from a half dozen to a dozen before they gave up. Just before we reached the last stop, I was on my feet. I opened my mouth to say something, and accidentally a little spittle came flying out of my mouth and landed on the leather glove of one of my attackers, which earned me a slap in the face. Finally, we reached the last stop. The doors opened and they ran out of the car except for one guy who I assume was their leader, the same guy who at the beginning got in my path and told me the other train cars were closed. He reached into his pocket, pulled out his wallet, and asked me if I needed a couple of dollars. I could not believe it. I did not want anything from him. I refused his offer, and he put his wallet back and walked off the train. I went to the front car to report to the conductor that I was attacked. I banged on the door, but there was no one there. I walked off the train onto the platform. I changed platforms. I saw a couple of police officers with their backs to me. They were exiting the platform by going down the stairs. I called out to them, but they did not hear me. I was too weak from the beatings to run after them. They disappeared out of my sight. It was just as well. I never memorized my attackers' faces as I tried not to make eye contact with them throughout the entire ordeal. I had forgotten what they looked like within seconds of them leaving the train. I would never be able to give an exact positive description, and I never knew their names nor they mine. Defeated, I caught my connecting train, this time finding and staying in a car that was reasonably filled with normal-looking people. The second I got home, I flopped into bed to go to sleep. When I woke up the next morning, my body ached all over. I imagine my attackers, if they are still alive today, are somewhere in their 50s. At the time of their attack on me, they were all a few years older than me. I estimate late teens to early 20s. Some of them no doubt have families of their own today. Wives, grown kids, homes, good jobs, and more. But I will also bet they keep it a secret from everyone in their inner circles, employers, co-workers, friends, and family, about the time they mugged and physically assaulted some young kid, a total stranger, for kicks on a subway train way back when. Their friends and families, wives and kids, probably look up to them, thinking they are the greatest, not knowing what they really did. My life at the time and the many years following were terrible and painful for many reasons. They are not to blame for the entire terrible state that was and is my life. To be fair, had I never encountered them, my whole life would still be terrible. But they contributed to the horrible state of my life. I have never forgotten or forgiven them for the torture they inflicted on me, both physically and mentally. I hope they all face justice one day. Story 18. My mother loves Christmas. It was around November, so we went to a very famous house that is full of Christmas decorations so she could see them. The house has 2 floors, and on the first floor I was feeling bad, but it was not unbearable, so I ignored it. When we were going upstairs, just as I stepped on the floor, I suddenly felt a weight over my shoulders and started feeling sick, with a headache and my stomach hurting. I tried to find a logical explanation and concluded it was because I was hungry, but I could not even believe that. I started just going around the store randomly watching things, but I always ended up near a door where I felt the worst, but something was calling me there. It was late at night, so the staff was busy with all the clients on the first floor, and on the second floor it was just me and my family. I decided to look into the door. I moved it a little, but I started feeling sick and like I was about to throw up, trying not to cry. Inside there was nothing special, just some boxes, but I saw a shadow that made me feel cold. I did not see anything but the darkness. Still, I felt like it was smiling and looking deep into me, searching for a way to harm me. I went almost passing out to my family and begged them to get out of there. I was so bad in that moment that no one said a thing. We ran out of the place with them helping me because I could not even walk correctly. It was just after passing the fence that I could recover myself. It has been almost 3 years and I cannot explain it, but I remember everything. Most of the time, it still freaks me out. Story 19. Myself and 6 friends aged 18 to 28, a mixed European group, were on a 5-day river canoe trip up a tributary of the Orinoco around Merida in Venezuela in 1998. Our guides were an older, rough-looking German man in his 60s and a slightly younger but shifty-looking Orinoco Basin native. One of our group spoke fluent German, but for some unexplained reason did not share with the guide that she could speak it. She later told us she did not want the creepy guide making comments to her that no one else could understand. We were 3 days in, roughing it in hammocks on the side of the river, not having seen a village for at least 8 hours. The guides kept to themselves after dinner, which was fine, but this evening they were a bit further away, and we could tell they were having a heated discussion in a mix of German and local dialect. Suddenly, the German girl in the group turned pale and looked terrified, and it took us a few minutes to calm her down. She explained she heard the German guide talk about making sure the others would be at the place, and that they would have the guns, and that the crocodiles would get rid of the guys, and the girls would go with them to some village the day after next. We freaked out, but decided that being alone with these 2 men, days from anywhere in the middle of the rainforest, we were trapped. We decided on a plan, which fortunately worked. Early the next day, we decided that the next time we saw another canoe expedition pass us, we would shout and scream at them that we were being kidnapped and needed help. Fortunately, a 4-canoe group came past and we enacted our plan. Our guides immediately got out of there, did not protest about our accusations, other than to pull a sawn-off shotgun from under a blanket and pointed at us to stop us chasing them, which confirmed they were planning to harm or traffic us, and they did not hang around to get caught. We were taken to the nearest village a few hours down a branching tributary, where we explained the situation to the local police and some soldiers that were on exercise. It turned out there was a suspected serial killer operating out of the Maracaibo area targeting tourists going into the forest, active since 1996. I was never able to confirm any of the information we were told by the police using any Western media source or internet searches. We still occasionally email each other about our close call, but it has been 20 years and we have moved on with our lives. I have never told family or my wife, and I do not think anyone else ever told more than a handful of people. Story 20. One day my friend and I went to a theme park. I had renewed my ticket online, but had to take the paper up to the booth for a new pass. We were going to the main park, so we stopped by the entrance area because there was no line. Later in the day, I started getting texts saying my name. It was weird because it was from a number I did not recognize, and they called me by name. I do not give my number out a lot, so it was odd, and I replied asking who it was. He said his name was Steven and asked what I was doing with that ugly guy. There were people who would know who I was with, but it was unlikely it would be anyone who would text me this. I knew very few people with that name. The text went back and forth for a bit, with him saying not to worry and that I knew him. He sent me a badge that had Steven on it and then said, "Have a good day at the park." This added to the creep factor because we decided to go to that park only while driving there, and neither of us remembered telling anyone which park we ended up at. I said that I had no clue who he was, and he sent back that I did not seem to care to find out and have a good day. So I stopped responding. He then sent me a map screenshot from wherever he was to my home address with a comment that it was not a bad drive. So my friend and I started walking to guest services because this was obviously no joke, and he had identified himself as an employee at this point. Almost no one I knew had my home address because I lived at home and did not like having people over. The last message he sent me was telling me not to get too creeped out and that he promised he was someone I already knew. He was the guy who printed my pass. In a transaction that took all of 2 minutes, he decided to take my cell number and home address off my account. He was fired that day from what I understood, although they did not want to say much, probably trying to control liability, and even a police officer came in and told me there was no crime, but I chose to file a report anyway because he had my home address. I later got a call from a detective who told me that I could press charges, and I did. He said based on how the guy messaged me, he had probably done it a lot, but I was the first one to connect the dots and do anything. I got a letter from the state attorney and sent back that I was still willing to testify. I have heard nothing since. I am guessing among all the crazy cases, mine did not justify much manpower. Luckily, I was able to put a face to it because he had his cell phone connected to his social media account. I still get chills looking through the messages years later. I kept them because the detective instructed me to. Even knowing that the case is probably not going anywhere at this point, I feel reassured that I have them if anything did happen, since he still has that address. It is almost funny that my friend at one point suggested that was who was messaging me, but at that point in the conversation, it was one of those outlandish comments that turned out to be true. Story 21. I lived in a small town, and at the age of 18, my friends and I used to go to the city, get high, and go to rave parties. One day we decided to take a newcomer who was a friend of mine but had never taken substances before. So the rule was that I had to babysit him all night. All 4 of us arrived in the city that night, took a few pills, and hit the clubs. After about 30 minutes, the new guy started to freak out a bit, so I took him outside for a walk through the city until he calmed down. This worked, and eventually we were just walking and talking. Now this new guy was also a little bit mouthy, always bragging, and for some reason that I still cannot explain. To this day, he suddenly started telling me he was a big-time dealer in the city. Of course he was not, but he was high, so I tried to quiet him down. Then he practically yelled out that he had every major dealer's phone number in his phone. The second the words left his lips, the guy walking in front of us that I did not notice until then stopped, turned around to face us, and just stared. He was over 6 feet tall, bald, wearing a full-body trench coat, and he looked like a dangerous person. We stopped, staring back, frozen in place. Suddenly, the trench coat guy stepped sideways into a convenience store directly next to us. My mouthy friend looked at me and said, "Run." So we ran at full speed until our lungs were bursting. We eventually stopped, and we were high as could be by then. We were already high, but the sprint, the adrenaline, and the fear just piqued our brains to the max. We had obviously escaped, so we started to laugh as we walked back to the club, through a park and up a lot of back streets and alleys to meet up with our other friends. We got to the club, went inside, and took a seat in the outdoor area to chill out. And while we were talking, my mouthy friend froze, leaned into me, and said the trench coat guy was standing in the corner watching us. I took a look, and it was him, but I was smart enough to realize that we were in a heavily surveilled place with security, and that if I freaked out, my mouthy friend would really freak out, since it was his first night on substances. So I told him it was not the same guy. He believed me and calmed down. We kept talking and stayed seated the entire night. For 6 hours, I refused to let us get up. My friend wanted to get up and dance, but I kept him chatting and distracted. He was out of it, so that was easy for me to do. The trench coat guy stood there for the entire night and did not move once. He just stared. Eventually, the club closed at around 7 in the morning, and the place started to empty. I looked up, and the trench coat guy was finally gone. We left and drove home. I have no idea to this day who that guy was, but I suspect he was a big player in the substance scene or an undercover officer. I do not know what he wanted, and I am glad I never got to find out. What baffles me most is how he tracked us back to the club. We were fit kids, and when we ran away, we must have covered 20 blocks, then stopped for 30 minutes to laugh and relax, then walked another 30 minutes back to the club. This guy must have been behind us the whole time. In the dark park we sat in alone, up the alleyways and through the city. He must have been there, staring, watching every step of the way right back to the club where he watched us for another 6 hours and never once moved. Story 22. I have had issues with sleep paralysis my whole life since I was very little. The way my sleep paralysis manifests is that I will go to bed, have many dreams that feel like a full night's sleep, and then I will wake up. I will wake up in whatever room I fell asleep in, but something feels off. That is when I realize there is someone there in my room watching me. It is not always the same, usually a man crouching in the corner, a man leaning over my bed, someone running their hands over the top of my body. When I was little, I would try to scream out for my dad, but nothing would come out, just my breath. I could see the man and he was staring at me, and I was red in the face trying to scream, but all that came out was a breath. Then I would actually wake up. That is when I realized I was not awake at all before, even though I had been 100% sure I was. So this has plagued me my whole life in this same pattern. Wake up, feel dread, see a man, try to scream, actually wake up. I even started to get a little more used to it and could recognize earlier what my sign was, that it was all fake, so I could calm down and wake up. On Halloween night 2015, I came home with my friend. I lived with 4 other girls and a roommate, but that night my friend was staying in my roommate's bed. I had been asleep for hours when I started to wake up because I felt something touch the foot of my bed. I opened my eyes and saw a man crouched down at the foot of my bed. He was in all black with a hood over his face, tied tight with dark black sunglasses, so most of his face was obscured. I recognized immediately that this must be my sleep paralysis acting up again, but I was scared, so the attempt to scream came out before I could process it all. Except this time, I heard this awful, blood-curdling scream. It sounded like a woman being attacked. She was screaming and screaming, and it would not stop. It took me a while to realize I was the one screaming. I had never heard myself sound like that before. I did not even recognize myself, just terrified. The man sprinted away, slammed the door, and I heard him run back through the house. My friend in the bed next to me was sitting there silent. The house was silent. I felt like a helpless child again. I turned to her and said, "Is this when you call emergency services?" She did not answer. My hands were shaking when I was calling, and I do not really remember much now. I know I started crying on the phone with the operator because I was afraid he was still in the house or had harmed my housemates because none of them came running. The operator told me to lock my door and not to leave the room until the police arrived. I do not know how long it took, but the sun came up while we waited. When I saw them out the window, I went running outside, screaming and crying to the police. The rest of the story is pretty uneventful. He stole my neighbor's bike, and the police never caught him, but they found the bike. I went to a therapist, and it did not help at all. She would say things like, "I bet you were really scared." Yes, I was. She gave me a week's worth of medication and told me to go home. I took 3 of the pills at once and just laid in bed awake and shaking all night. It did not work for me at all. I started sleeping in class and missing notes. I am better now, but I have given up on sleeping well. I have to get very numb if I want to fall asleep, so I usually do. I cannot sleep next to people because if they move, I wake up, and if they talk or touch me, I will scream. But I do not really think about it anymore. Story 23. This happened back in 2008, just after my family had moved to a rural town in Oregon. I was 12 at the time, and my family and I were driving home after visiting my step-grandparents that evening. It was late, around 11 at night, and my mom had decided to take the unlit country back road home. I was in the back seat with my younger brother, trying to tune out my parents arguing up front while my brother was zoning out and looking out the back window. Very suddenly, he nudged me and pointed out the back window, insisting I turn around and look. I was very tired and irritated with my parents, who would not stop yelling at one another. so I shrugged him off. He became more insistent, and I could hear fear creeping into his voice. I pulled up my hoodie and ignored him. Now he was frantically trying to get my parents' attention, and they were screaming at him to be quiet. This went on for a while, but eventually he calmed down, although I could hear him turn around in his seat every once in a while to look out the back window. The next day I asked him what had him so worked up in the car. He described to me in a shaky voice that something had been following behind the car the night before. He detailed seeing 3 dim points of blue-white light arranged in a black triangle shape following closely behind the car. And when my mom would break the tail lights, lit it dimly so he could see a dome shape in the middle of the black mass. He said it did not jostle around like a car would when my mom drove over the potholes in the road, and it was following us closely, so he thought maybe it was hovering off the ground. It sounded ridiculous, but he told me this with such conviction and fear in his voice, I know he must have seen something that night. We drove that road many times after and never experienced anything like that again. Story 24. I was 12 years old. This was back in 1985, and a few of the streets near where I lived were still dirt roads. We lived near a Catholic church, and there was a fair every year come January. Me and an older friend were walking towards the fair at around 7 in the evening, and it was already quite dark. All of a sudden, as we crossed the corner and started walking on the dirt road, my friend just froze. I asked him what it was. He got pale and stammered. In front of us, a couple of feet away, there was something, hard to describe really. It was dark, but this was darker than the darkness, which is the only way I can find to describe it. It was a woman buried from the waist down and wailing. Her wailing somehow, though near us, was heard in the distance. Both my friend and I immediately thought about the ghost people talk about, which is said to haunt places with water nearby. It is said that her wailing can be heard far when she is near, and near when she is far. We both started running towards the church, which must have been half a mile away or so. As I turned back, I could see her slowly crawling out of the ground. I stumbled but regained my footing and kept running behind my friend. We were both shaken up and were unwilling to walk back home until my parents showed up. Since then, a couple of times at night, even as the roads are now paved and there is street lighting, sometimes when I visit the folks, I hear the dogs howl a couple of times in the middle of the night. Some friends that still live in the old neighborhood say they can still hear her sometimes. Story 25. Almost a decade ago, I was on a business trip for the company I worked for with a few fellow coworkers that I knew pretty well. A Friday before heading home, we were close to a theme park in Pennsylvania and figured we had enough time to hit a few rides before heading home the next day. It was hotter than anything that week, easily over 100 degrees each day, so naturally only the water park made sense. We went down a few water slides and found a 4-person tube ride to close out the water park. We grabbed the tube and started our trek to the top of the water slide. Surprisingly enough, there were a ton of signs about weight limit, caution riding, and more. A buddy of mine started getting really concerned about the signs and asked all of our weights. I was the lightest at about 165 pounds. Jeff, the one asking, was about 280, Sean around 300, and Scott was about 330. We were a large group. All these signs were saying weight should not exceed 800 pounds while riding. Needless to say, we told him to stop worrying and go on with it. We finally got to the top and started getting settled in, waiting our turn to go. Jeff immediately stopped the lifeguard girl and asked if we were quite a bit overweight and if we should even be going down this thing. The girl looked at all of us and asked how much we all weighed, collectively about 1,000 pounds. She said, hang on to go ask the other lifeguard, who literally came over and gave a sturdy, you are fine, and started us down the slide. We slowly started down the top of the slide and eased into the first bank. I managed to spin around to the side that was going to the side of the slope, and my backside went off the edge of the slide. I laughed in terror that this already was not good. We gained so much speed going into the next bank, we shot up the side of the slide, and it threw me out of the tube at the highest point. I was literally overlooking the park. I was so high, I could see straight down to the ground and was flapping my arms like a cartoon character trying to fly. Jeff somehow managed to grab my foot and pull me back into the slide, where I fell on Sean's head, and we all fell out of the tube. We rode the rest of the way down with no tube at all, tossing and turning and trying to keep my heart from beating out of my chest.